just say that I will also speak in Spanish because I think it gets more connected with José Carlos and the house where we are. After all, we are in Spain, in Catalonia. So I will speak in Spanish. Bueno, antes de empezar también.
Before starting, I would like to say it's a big pleasure to me to be here, especially coming after Carlos. And apart from being a research colleague, he's a great friend of mine. It's the third time I'm at the conference, and to me it's a big pleasure to share this knowledge we've been accumulating. And I would like to thank the pupils from Girona who have made great pictures of that ritual we've done in Brazil. This is a map of the hundreds, well, not all groups at the moment, but the main centers at the moment where there are ayahuasca studies in Brazil, Mexico, US, Canada, Spain, UK, Holland, Czech Republic, and Australia. But in fact, in terms of quantity and also regarding depth, not only from observational studies, Brazil and Spain is where there is the biggest hotspots, and José Carlos has came across Catalonia, where they came to 2016 to make the PhD with Dr. Riba at the Hospital de São Paulo, and the year after he got to know Dr. Bosso. And the importance of Jordi is that it was the first controlled studies. For the first time, somebody volunteered in a hospital and a research center with ayahuasca, with lyophilized ayahuasca. It was in capsules, also placed a placebo there. So the first neuropic image studies, and I've done it also for 2018 because Dr. Riva has done it, and ICERS turns 10 years this year. In 2009, José Carlos said his studies began, and it's the biggest studies in terms of participation. There are some ayahuasca community in Brazil and in Spain, and sometimes it turned out to be better than the controls, and also the image techniques I was seeing today. So we come here to South America, to Brazil, which is where everything started here around, and it has spread all over the country. Here in Ribeirão Preto, it's in São Paulo state. Brazil is like Spain. We don't have provinces, but we have Spain, states, and São Paulo is the capital of the same state, and Ribeirão Preto is 300 kilometers away from São Paulo. This is Brazil. Of the three main research centers we have here, Dr. Bartiro Xavier, Dr. Toffoli, and in Bahia, and Dr. Paulo Barbosa, and in Natal, Dr. Távila Darujo and Dr. Pagnano Fontes already introduced the results in Hall 2 at 10 o'clock. So this is the timeline of what has been done specifically in Brazil in the last years and decades. We started here with the Ayahuasca Project. We have Dr. McKenna here. He also took part in this study together with Dr. Calway, Charles Groth, and many people who were members of the União de Vegetal. It is one of the main ayahuasca communities in Brazil, and this study in the 90s was the first study by Dr. Levi Galini, a psychiatrist, who was one among the first to publish in a scientific magazine that ayahuasca can treat drug and cocaine dependence. The Ayahuasca Project showed that in ayahuasca communities there were psychiatrically healed people from a cognitive and also from a substance consumption perspective. No one uses any substance. Smoking is very badly seen, alcohol as well, This is where we took the same evidence about the anti-addictive effect of ayahuasca. And here in the 2000s, we have Dr. Xavier from the Urifest, Dr. Barbosa, Dr. Dativo made of the first studies with teenagers who were taking ayahuasca. 70% of them took ayahuasca since their mothers had been pregnant and they had taken this as children and teenagers. This study has been very important because the Brazilian authorities were jeopardizing giving ayahuasca to children and teenagers. In Brazil, it's allowed because it's seen as a religious right of the families, but there was a study showing that the children and teenagers have no psychiatric and cognitive problems, and they even took less substances than the adults. And Dr. Paulo made one of the first studies of people who never had taken ayahuasca and made a follow-up for some weeks and months, and the first evidence of these prospective studies that people were taking ayahuasca and after some weeks or months later they felt better or with less psychiatric symptoms. And out of there, coming to São Paulo University in Ribeirão Preto, this is my boss, my supervisor, Dr. Halak. In 2004, Dr. Halak started with the ayahuasca ritual, and they said, well, this has in effect, it gives you joy and calmness. That's not euphoria. So here they start thinking, and Dr. De Araújo and Dr. Traulio, who is in Natal, also was on the team. They were thinking how to do this with ayahuasca, with a survey, and they started with the first neuroimage studies with ayahuasca in Brazil. At the time, it was when I came to Spain, when I left Brazil, there was no group doing research with humans, and years after I got to know that the group had been studied, their studies, but it was with Dr. Jordan and Dr. Bolso then, but it was one of the first studies that showed the neurologic basis of the visions of ayahuasca. This study is very interesting because explaining very quickly, the person has to imagine an object, open eyes, under the effects of ayahuasca and without ayahuasca. And under the effects of ayahuasca, imagining it, the cerebral sign was as if they were looking with open eyes. Hence the title of the article. And this is why the effects of ayahuasca call our attention, of the Westerners and the indigenous. And from there, the studies have evolved. And Dr. Braulio went to Natal, to the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. And here, the first study of antidepressant effects of ayahuasca came up, which in reality, I think, has been the first evidence of clinical population. Was quite difficult. Persons called with major recurrent depression who have had 2 or 3 different attempts for medication which didn't improve. They were at the Ribeirão Preto hospital and they had this time frame of 2 weeks to change medication, and there they took a single dose of ayahuasca, and Dr. Fernanda Palhano Fontes already introduced the results in the other hall. And then the first double-blind study, placebo-controlled, was started. For those who don't know very much what is placebo good for, with depression studies, the placebo effect can even reach 40-45%. Hence, it is very important to include the placebo in these studies and also show why. Well, this is the summary of our 2 main studies and my publications on this subject. This study is open-ended, no placebo, and this here, the higher, is the biggest depression symptom, and the other is mania. One is that ayahuasca doesn't seem to induce mania, and 3 weeks after, with a single dose, the people reported improvement after 21 days, the depression came back and it was derived. So it's clear that this is something experimental, preliminary. We still haven't found neither treatment or healing for depression, but this is the first evidence within hospital context, and start talking to health authorities that with the scientific methodology it seems that it has big major antidepressant potential in these three brain areas that I described here. I'm not going to enter into detail. The most important is that the activation with our volunteers includes the same areas as classic antidepressant, also the traditional ones, regarding the therapeutic effect. So through our ways of action, ayahuasca seems to reach the same result, and the important here is that the traditional antidepressants sometimes take these 21 days to have effect, and anxiety may increase over these weeks. And with ayahuasca, we've seen that in the first hours, people reported as well-being. And here we have the study, 00 placebo-based study. This is what I was explaining. With placebo, people report feeling better. Therefore, it is important to include a placebo in the study. And even this variable, ayahuasca is separated from placebo on the 7th day. People are reporting that they feel increasingly better, even with placebo. What is very important to consider here is our clinical population. It's people, generally speaking, poor, who never had been so well treated. And even Dr. Browley told me that the volunteers didn't want to leave hospital as they were being taken care very well. Many people were taking care of them, and taking care of people who had a therapeutic effect, and that's important to make a difference between this and placebo. As I said before, and Jose Carlos, we're doing systematic reviews. We try to place everything that may produce evidence, from the ayahuasca effects to treat dependencies, and anxiety and depression, the neurological basis of these substances, also the different effects. We don't know. We know that unfortunately this can happen. Some people can have prolonged adverse effects like a psychotic outbreak, but we need to be very careful to protect these people. If we understand they shouldn't take ayahuasca, for instance. And this is also a way of showing ourselves to the scientific community and telling them, well, there is evidence, there are observational studies, there are studies that show that ayahuasca or insulated ingredients also can treat anxiety and also dependence. So we are doing the clinical studies to show that this works in both healthy humans and patients. Here we have our lab where we do our experiments. It's quite a simple lab. We've done it on purpose. We think, what if the ayahuasca is integrated into medicine one day or just around the corner, and what happens if we go to a normal psychiatric hospital? Therefore, we've addressed people at hospitals that take many people. We've taken ayahuasca from Santo Daime, from Ribeirão Preto. These are the three studies that are currently occurring. We're doing a study with social anxiety, people having difficulties in doing what I'm doing now, or just talking to an audience, to the boss, or even eating in front of somebody else. The three studies are double-blind and they are closed. And there are little volunteers left. This is the study of Juliana, who will introduce that at 6:15 p.m. We are studying the effect of ayahuasca in introducing emotions, so many disorders, people with difficulty in recognizing joy in the face of the other person, the fact of feeling what the others feel just by looking them into the face is something that is affected in some psychiatric environments. And Giordano is being very interesting, and he's going to introduce that this afternoon, shows that the interaction between cannabidiol and ayahuasca. Cannabidiol is an agent in cannabis, and these are the first results of this research. and Professor Giordano will introduce that more in detail in the afternoon, but we've produced the first evidence in humans that ayahuasca and other psychedelics that act as such produce change in the endocannabinoid system. We have a cannabis system within our whole body, like the opioid system. And here we have andamina and TAG, which is the two endocannabinoids. And it seems that I just take one case, ayahuasca could be touching the endocannabinoid system. This may be involved with its therapeutic potentials. And Juliana has just published this study. We are doing this right now with a study, but it seems that our substance with a similar action mechanism seem to reduce the ability of recognizing negative emotions, and this is also done by the antidepressants, but in this case only with 1 or 2 doses, and they seem to stimulate the activity of the tonsils, and this the Migdal. And we're talking about post-trauma, and with post-traumatic stress it's very activated, and they may also affect the anxiolytic effects of ayahuasca. Our next surveys that are being created in Brazil, we don't have heroin or programs with opioids or methamphetamine, but our main public health problem, I would say in South America in general, is alcohol. And in Brazil, the people from university usually drink a lot, and they have intoxications. And we would like to make a study with students drinking a lot, and we'd like to give them 1 or 2 doses of ayahuasca. Let's see if that has an important therapeutic effect. And we're also thinking, and studies have already been done with cancer or terminal disease within this picture of existential anxiety, because death may come within days. So in women with breast cancer in Brazil, let's see if ayahuasca could help reduce that anxiety or depression. And finally, even though it doesn't have to do a lot, we're doing a first study control with ibogaine, which we're going to launch next year for alcohol dependency. So here we have the people involved. It's my big boss, Professor Jaime, I'm here. Jose Carlos, our Professor Flavia, psychologist. She works a lot with us, and here Juliana and Giordano. And to conclude, as I mentioned for the last 15 seconds, again, it's a big honor to be here and introducing this to you next to Jose Carlos. And we also have a very good connection in Brazil. All the surveys we do are made with not with governmental funds, but the agencies to promote the country, and it's good that ayahuasca is included as any sort of research. We don't need to create anything else. They perceive it as something from the country that is worth researching more in depth. So thank you very much.
Gracias. Tenemos 20 minutos para...
Thank you. We have 20 minutes for questions. There are microphones, and you can ask either in English or in Spanish.
Either Spanish or English or Portuguese. No, wait.
Ya, listo, ahorita sí. Todas las investigaciones.
All the pieces of research that have been carried out, they've been focused on the Santo Daime sacramental brew, or other studies have been done taking into account all of the ayahuasca tradition in Peru, for instance. It's different, you know, it's very different. DVU Santo Daime drink or ayahuasca concentrate, indigenous concentrate. And I wonder, that's my question, whether any studies have been conducted with concentrate of ayahuasca. So your question was whether we have studies with ayahuasca extract or different concentrations? Yes, that's my question, exactly. Yes, actually the three studies that we are conducting at the time, we used the 2 times of daime. Usual regular daime and 3-in-1 daime, as they call it. It's, just to summarize, it's 3 times more concentrated. That's the idea, and that's the name. We are even carrying out analysis, chemical analysis, chemical tests. These data are blind, so we couldn't, in theory, compare the results, but that's part of our plan. Not just using different types of ayahuasca, but conducting also chemical studies about the concentrations, the stabilization, how, you know, for how long alkaloids remain stable in the system. And the answer would be yes, I guess, to your question, but I wouldn't dare to say now whether there is a difference, a clear difference, because I have taken ayahuasca more than 100 times, and I'm still surprised, you know. In an experimental session, I still don't know who used what, and because they're naive subjects, they've never used ayahuasca. So yes, the answer would be yes. Thank you.
Done with ayahuasca for learning disabilities.
For what? For what?
Learning disabilities.
Dificultad de aprender. Hay estudios para gente que tienen dificultad de aprender.
Dificultad de aprender.
Sí, sí.
Déficit de atención. Sí, sí.
Do you mean attention deficit disorder? Well, it's not been done, and it is a possibility because it has been shown in animals. The beta-carbolines may increase dopamine, which is the medication to treat those disorders. So there is preclinical evidence in rodents, but as far as I know, for attention deficit disorder, exactly. And I've never heard about a case ratio, but it might be interesting. Thank you.
It's always lovely to see women at the mic as well as men. Thank you.
Bueno, también yo quería hacer
I would like to say something along the lines of what he was saying. There's a research line based on trying to find ayahuasca applications from a biomedical perspective to apply to a clinical perspective, and that's a research line that's underway. Actually, the main use of ayahuasca is a community use, group sessions, and probably the main interest, at least from the point of view of our research, ethnographical, and also, as I mentioned before, in rural communities in Spain and in Catalonia, and also in the quantitative studies. That's the idea, the community use that helps ease the relation, you know, unite them and tight the bonds, because the perception of community bonds is a problem, a healthcare problem, like smoking or obesity. Ayahuasca and other traditional plants indeed have been used in traditional cultures apart from the spiritual effects, or precisely because of these effects, in order to really tie up these community bonds. And from this perspective, and outside of specific indications, attention deficit disorder, etc., there's something that's core and common to all of this, and many of these problems maybe are a consequence of more basic or more nuclear problems, and that's where ayahuasca can act. Yes, but I I would like to know about the treatment per se. Are you considering what the role of the shaman would be, or a treatment that would be more focused on the traditional practice? I mean, for instance, depression, the study of depression, to test the placebo effect in a non-religious biomedical setting. Are you considering to study the effect that this might have in a controlled trial to compare the hospital-based effect versus ceremony? How would you then, define the role of the shaman when he could be asked to chair, direct these sorts of therapies? What would be the perspective when administering a treatment? Jose Carlos showed his studies, and that is actually it's happening in reality. I mean, people are seeking these therapies in rituals, community rituals, and people refer anti-depression effects like anxiolytics. And what we do, it's not that. And imagine these are people from Brazil that have no interest in psychedelics, and sometimes they have no interest in getting to know about alternative therapies or indigenous communities. These are people that simply want to stop suffering. That's the point. And I don't think it's that different. It's that separate. You know, if you're there and if you want to go to a hospital and you're in a safe room, you might as well take ayahuasca. And other people might decide to choose to go to Rio Branco and get to know the Colombian tradition. It's the same world to me. It's the same realm. It's not better or worse. It's just simply different. And we don't have data yet to compare whether in a ceremony, in a ritual, or in a hospital it would be more or less efficacious. Nobody knows so far, but we try to integrate things in our local community, local culture in Brazil. People think of Brazil and ayahuasca, but most of the Brazilian population know nothing about ayahuasca. I've administered over 1,000 questionnaires in students in Sao Paulo University, and 90% of them didn't know what ayahuasca was, what daime was. So it's a traditional society, and if you go through a more formal path, maybe it's easier to accept for some tiers of society, at least. I hope I answered. I got struck about the interaction of cannabinoids with ayahuasca. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the endocannabinoid system? Or are these really very preliminary studies? How did you come up with the idea to begin with? Well, the endocannabinoid system is to do with everything, neurotransmitters, it's the brain, it's in the peripheral system, it's everywhere. Professor Halleck has said this, and ayahuasca is related. We have some evidence in rodents. If you administer LSD, psilocybin, DMT, with this sector that I mentioned before, some endocannabinoids would increase or decrease. So that's where we took the idea from, because we thought maybe this happens in humans. So for these preliminary cases, we are actually quantifying the endocannabinoids, and we will have a more robust answer there, a result, because it's a preliminary idea. We'll see what happens. We'll have to wait and see. Any physiological process modifies the endocannabinoid system, because this system is affecting all the physiological systems in the body, the tissues, the organs, the processes, everything. So it was only obvious that MDMA probably would modify it, and exercise, workout does change it, and these altered states of conscious that were related to opiates in the past. Probably it's the endocannabinoid system the responsible for that as well. So it related to everything. So it was logical. to think that probably ayahuasca would alter it as well. But what's interesting to see is what this change means and how this may be used in a clinical setting. Hello, I would like to know, Dr. Payano presented the randomized double-blind study, but the other preliminary observational studies that are not double-blind, etc., are these not clinical trials per se? Are they just studies? These are non-controlled studies. There's no placebo. That's what it means. So before entering into a clinical trial that's very expensive, well, observational studies are conducted. They're cheaper, and you can encompass a great deal of population. If you find something interesting, you then conduct a non-controlled study to double-check the outcome. And if the outcome is robust and valid, then you can proceed on to a clinical controlled trial. And let me interrupt here, because we don't want to convey the idea that a trial is better than the other one. No, these are just different evidence. You go to Mapia and you do an observational study there, it's really very valid than taking the people to the hospital. However, in the hospital you see things that you wouldn't control otherwise, so it's a complement. Yes, I understand, but I saw that there are other trials planned. So I just wondered, are you going to conduct clinical trials in the field of depression? I was just thinking, is it phase 1 or not yet? Well, probably most of you know that in Brazil, the economic and political situation is not easy. So the idea is to continue and studying it in depression and maybe trying other doses, because sometimes people take every 2 weeks and it depends on the tolerance, and that's in our minds. So it's our idea, but it's difficult to design these trials. You need more people involved, and so far, in my organization, at least, we cannot do one, but it's in our pipeline. Let's hope we can continue forward. Hello, thank you for your presentations. I would like to ask about the future. What do you think is the research line that probably would be most interesting to promote? Should it be basic clinical research, more meta-analyses? And what would be the main obstacle that you would encounter? Do you think it would be resources or the policies? What's preventing us to moving forward faster? Well, it's about preference. I would like to study. I would like to continue in public health, especially I would like to focus on chronic pain. It's a huge problem that affects 20% of the population aged 40 or more. It takes 3 years to get a diagnosis. There is no treatment for chronic pain. Pharmacological therapies fail. We know that, and we know that they fail because when pain is chronic, it's no longer a symptom but a disease, and there is an important psychological component related to it. And when this component, when this is compared, subjects comparing those that respond to pharmacological treatments and those who don't, there are certain alterations in some brain areas, and that's where ayahuasca and other psychoactive substances act upon. So as my preference and as a solution for public health issues, pain and chronic pain would be interesting. And also illnesses, mental illnesses, because pharmacology has failed in psychiatry and psychology. There's no new molecule being discovered for 50 years. Safety and efficacy of the psychopharmacological therapies is questioned more and more, especially to treat depressions and other disorders. So here is an interesting, promising research line for clinical practice as well. And another thing to top it all, and I would promote this if I were an agency, is neurological disorders. People are aging. We have no treatments to stop or hold down Alzheimer's or Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases. The WHO estimates that in 2030, we have no drug that at least stops the advance of Alzheimer's for 6 months. The public health system, or what remains of it as we know it, will collapse. However, I don't want to foster this biomedical line of research either. I mean, it's very interesting. We need to devote funds to research, yes, without pursuing those that want to take these substances in these contexts that we are investigating, in the context of the communities that do use these substances, these plants, to take care of themselves. And we don't need to expect miracles from them. People decide to use them because they want to and because they feel better when they do. Obstacles for research, there are very many. Funding, of course, for starters, social, political issues, stigma, you name it. That would be probably another conference altogether. But we are on top of it. We are doing research from our different perspectives, biomedical in his case, probably more naturalistic for me. And the idea is to integrate the indigenous perspective. That is the challenge for me. And so far, the indigenous perspective was out of the equation. And that's one of the challenges for us at ICEERS. It's not easy, it's not going to be quick, but it needs to happen. Thank you. We only have 5 more minutes left. So these 3 people that want to ask a question, maybe ask them in a row, ask them all in a row, and then we'll give the answers, the 3 of them also all in a row.
I think some things have been touched already, but I'm a herbalist and complementary and alternative medicine practitioner. And the question that I'm going to ask raises a discussion that maybe a few people also here are curious about, which is whether, even considering the limits of the mainstream scientific paradigm, is there any talk in the scientific community and in the work that you're doing in looking at the vibrational and energetic effects that ayahuasca has on the human body and the energetic bodies of the human body?
Thank you. Next question, please.
Great question. I also want to know. Science is funded, it needs funding, and a lot of governments can provide this funding, but at the moment a lot of governments are, let's say, it's illegal in a lot of countries, and I'm curious how much focus there is on doing a bottom-up, demand-based science to inform the governments to eliminate these things, and then a large pot of money will open towards ayahuasca research. And I'm curious what the thought of you two is about this topic, to open it more.
Vou perguntar em português, ok? Tá? Minha pergunta é bem simples. Eu não vi comentário de como estão as pesquisas a respeito de
We understand the question was about neuroplasticity. Okay. About the question related to energy and the bodies of energy, it's difficult to measure this in science terms. I work in a traditional psychiatric hospital and we don't even know how to do this. I myself don't know whether we have the tools to do this. It's not a prejudice or anything. It's not part of our practice, research practice, about the legal issues and the funds. That's part of what we do. We try to break prejudice, break molds, so that people are able to see that this plant has a broad potential for research, to research the therapeutical effects, the conscience, and ayahuasca is primitive in Brazil, and if you want, you can find it in the country, and we're privileged, but other countries with more strict regulations, I'm sure they will make it more flexible as we provide more and more data like the ones we shared. Neuroplasticity, that was the latest question. There is evidence of 2 groups in the world, one here in Spain, with Jordi, I think, and the group from Holland and another one in Brazil, and they've shown that DMT can be it can cause neurogenesis, so it can generate new neurons, but it's not easy to jump onto the clinical setting. More neurons is not necessarily good or positive. We've seen this preclinically in animals. Maybe these substances allow for the brain to be more plastic, more flexible, it seems, but in how this can be applied, it's not as clear, but it seems it leads to thinking more clearly. In depression, that would be good, stopping the negative effects, and that has to do with neuroplasticity, so that would be a good starting point, but it's very, very, it's in its budding stages yet. Yes, neuroplasticity, of course it happens. Of course, because ayahuasca, DMT, inactive ayahuasca, and these receptors that we heard about, the release glutamate, which is at the basis of the long-term potentiation of neuroplasticity, and we are seeing this. We've seen this in the users of ayahuasca. They have different thickness of the cortical front and the cortical thickness. And about legal applications, yes, these research, we do this and we are aware of the fact that we want a bottom-up change, and the civil society needs to lead the change. But when the civil society has problems, people are arrested, etc., we have this battery of scientific evidence to, show to the judge. And so far, all the suits that we've attended, they've ended up well. Great.
Guimarães.